Hi everyone, hola. Today we'll be talking about Nuestros Saberes on Teorías Literarias, Maestras Bilingües mapping their Herstories and language experiences. We're a group of educators, teachers, mothers, sisters, daughters, maestras that are coming together to share with you hard work that is very deep and work that is going to highlight how we engage in reflection and hopefully inviting you to engage in that reflection. And we're going to start with a poem in order to ground ourselves, in order for all of us in this virtual space. If we were in person, we could all feel what's going on around us, but in this virtual space, to listen to these words and to listen to what those words and how they resonate with your body, with feelings, with emotions, with memories. So here we go. You can read along with us as I read it. In Lakesh, Mija, you are more than shared flesh. You are warrior at evening time. You are powerful voice at morning prayer. You are ancestral lucha, burning sage under your bare feet. Descalza, the earth ignites you into the day como águila, eagle spirit. Mija, you are of Madre Tierra. You are trenzas por la madrugada, Holy Spirit ribbons through each braid of charcoal, your curious fingers through carrot strips. Orange fire in your mouth, a dragon of giggles, where I find God on a chipped tooth, by Carolina Hinojosa Cisneros.
We thank you for being here with us today and sharing in this storytelling of experiences of love, hope, joy, and healing. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the partnership and what brought all of us together as teachers, teacher educators, researchers, daughters, mothers, and so forth. And so this is part of a larger study that took place at a pre-K 5 elementary school in Central Texas. And this school, for this partnership, we were working alongside dual language and ESL teachers who were implementing a bilingual writers workshop. And the school had been putting in some work, doing some professional development, and had gathered some grant money to support this facilitation that really was from the ground up, teacher initiated, literacy coach initiated, principal initiated, to really honor and center the voices of their young writers and to show the possibilities that exist when we center culture, language, and identity in our writing classrooms via a writer's workshop. And so we worked alongside them as part of a Spencer grant to document this process, to learn from the teachers, to learn from the students, and to see what the possibilities are when you also let teachers lead and follow students in their writing journeys. And so we documented the ways that we conducted classroom observations, we conducted interviews with the teachers where we sat and talked to them about their practice, their beliefs, their values. And in our conversations, we learned a lot about their own culture and identity and how they brought this to their work. And so that's where this conversation really started. And then us as researchers, me and Judith, we also thought about our own experiences in school and as teacher educators and as teachers. And so we've been in constant conversation and thinking about how our identities and our experiences as Latinas, Chicanas, and Mexicanas really impact how we come to the classroom and why we come to the space, and how the work that we do, which is really rooted in how we were brought up and the things that we wish that we had. And so we are so happy to be able to highlight two of our amazing bilingual teachers that we worked with during this partnership that have now become really close friends that we turn to for each other for advice, and that we continue to learn with and alongside. And so these are our brilliant maestras who are in this space with us today. Yakaira Vasquez Rivera is a third grade bilingual teacher. And she was part of that larger research study. And I had the privilege of working alongside her and learning from her and her students over the course of a year until we went to shelter in place remote learning. And Carmela Valdez, a first grade dual language teacher at the school, who I also know, and Judith had the privilege of working alongside during this work, and who really helped to get this work off the ground, to really advocated. And you'll hear more about that. I don't want to take up too much time because I really want us to hear from
them. Okay, I'm going to read this piece. It is by Gloria Ansaldúa. See, I'm nervous. Ethnic identity is twin skin with linguistic identity. I am my language. Until I can take pride in my language, I cannot take pride in myself. Until I can accept as legitimate Chicano, Texas Spanish, Tex-Mex, and all the other languages I speak, I cannot accept the legitimacy of myself. Until I am free to write bilingually and to switch codes without having always to translate, while I still have to speak English or Spanish when I would rather speak Spanglish, and as long as I have to accommodate the English speakers rather than having them accommodate me, my tongue will be illegitimate.
And so we wanted to ground this conversation in the words of Gloria Anzaldúa and talk about this way that we are so connected to our language and how it is part of our identity. And like Anzaldúa has theorized, you take away that, you take away part of who I am. And in our conversations with our collective conversations, and in the work that these teachers are doing alongside their young writers, this was very central. This was about joy, about love, about healing, about being the teacher that we wish we had when we were younger. And so we wanted to bring Gloria Anzaldúa into this space, as she really is foundational to how we're thinking about this work together. And so there was three overarching questions that really drove our conversations, our collective conversations, and the ways that we were thinking about language and culture and identity as it pertained to our writing classrooms, but also to our teaching and the way that we came into these spaces. Also us as researchers as well. So the questions that are in front of you are, what can we learn about maestras of the Latinx diaspora and the stories they tell and write about themselves, and the ways they encourage and co-create spaces for their students to write their stories? What are the pedagogical and reflexive practices that Latina educators engage in to create collaborative, humanizing, and culturally sustaining learning spaces? In what ways does historicizing language, landscapes, and borders help to contextualize and disrupt the colonial project of schooling in dual immersion classrooms? What motivates these maestras to disrupt binary logics and draw from experiential, familial, and communal knowledge? And so these four questions really drove our collective conversations and the work that we did to map our stories and to think about our experiences, our own experiences as students, the experiences of our ancestors, our elders, our mothers and fathers, and how we drew upon all of these things, and sometimes ways that we didn't anticipate, to do the work with and for our students who are learning many languages and who come to us with many languages.
So I want to share with you all a little bit about the methods and our approach. So we wanted to make sure that we were legitimizing and drawing from Ansaldúa's quote, the experiential knowledge and the subjective experiences of, these maestras. And we aligned our work with Chicana feminist epistemology, and also draw from critical race spatial analysis methodology, because we want to engage in a reflexive practice and expand writing paradigms, what writing means, and how we can reframe how writing is taught both to children and teachers, and the way that we unlearn how maybe very restricted or rigid ways of writing were taught to us. So we invited the teachers and ourselves as well to map their language and learning journeys, because they intersect, right? For them to reflect back into their childhood experiences, those memories, those things that right away came up, and maybe after being in conversation with each other, you know, that complemented or reminded you of something else. We started talking about ideologies, right? And those normalized understandings that are part of schooling and that, you know, become mainstream and become the one ultimate truth, but that we knew from our lived experiences, and also from what the wealth of knowledge that we brought from our families and our community, that those weren't speaking truth to our experiences and to the experiences of our students. And we also, you know, took this methodology approach because we wanted to center the stories that were learned from home, the stories from the communities, and those stories that we engage in creating with our students, you know, as Latina, Chicana, of Indigenous descent women. So yeah, that's what led us to those questions that Doctora Flores shared with you, just because we wanted to make sure to create this space where teachers in the classroom and also teacher educators have an opportunity, you know, to kind of push back to those narrow understandings and assumptions about writing and children who are bilingual and multilingual, in order to see them for what they have, instead of continuing to define them from deficit perspectives. So we will be introducing our two maestras. Well, we can let them introduce themselves as well, but they're going to be sharing about their experience mapping their hair stories and their language experiences.
Thank you guys for the introduction. My name is Yakira Vasquez Rivera, and my her story begins with my migration, my move from Puerto Rico. I'm from a small town called San Germán, Puerto Rico. It is one of the oldest, if not the oldest city in the Caribbean. There's a lot of deep-rooted, ancient, ritualistic culture in Puerto Rico. And the first picture that you've shown is, or that I have posted on this slide, is the church which my parents got married in. It's been there since like the 1400s. And the view, my favorite view of my abuelita's house that really centers me when I am feeling kind of sad. So my story begins with the migration, the year 2000. I was 4 years old when I first arrived in Killeen, Fort Hood, Texas. My mother, who was a young mother at 26, didn't know English and was put on a plane with me and my 1.5-year-old brother by herself. And she came here somehow magically. I think that she is bad as heck for being able to do that. I give all the props to her, thinking about, you know, she was my age when she already had me. It's like, that is so powerful to think about. When I was placed into schools, I had begun in Fort Hood at a local Head Start. My dad obviously didn't make a lot of money as a beginning in the military career. And I was fortunate enough to be put in a Head Start where I was able to learn a little bit of English. And the unfortunate part of that is when I was placed into kindergarten, my English was good enough where they had put me in a monolingual classroom. I thought it was because my English was good enough. Until recently, I spoke to my mother about what this work is and how deeply rooted and powerful it's become into my life, and just kind of how it has centered me and has guided me to who I am. So I asked her, how was I placed into a monolingual classroom? And she told me here the story for the first time, that as two young parents, the schools had said, you know, her English is good enough. If we put her in a dual language classroom, it's just to exit her. She's not going to gain anything from it. She's going to be put in a monolingual classroom anyway. So you might as well just put her in there. And had a deep-rooted rage that I wasn't given the opportunity to learn a little bit more, and be put in a classroom that, and honestly, I had only been in the United States for a year. And so my story became assimilation. It became losing who I was to the idea of the American dream, of this idea that by coming to the United States, that maybe somehow we're going to be better. And the only thing that had left was pain and hurt and forgetting who I was. I am grateful to be here in the United States. I'm grateful for the opportunity that it has given me, but also kind of coming to the other side, knowing that this country has hurt me. And that is also okay, but it also needs to be talked about. And so my slides have pictures of me growing up, thinking, you know, really being into like this academic student, and kind of looking at myself in a reflective point of view, and seeing the hurt that little Yakira had. And then the next portion is, I was always looking for who I was growing up. I was always doing my cultural projects on Puerto Rico, no matter if I had been doing the same project since the first grade, picking out new books. I was always reading these books, trying to find a little bit more of myself. The first time I did a project like this was in the second grade, which I had shown that picture of little Yakira in the second grade in an elementary school, which I hold dear in my heart. I love that elementary school. They really guided me. But I had always went to look for who I was up until middle school. And if you'd like to go to the next slide. My journey actually jumps straight through middle school. I don't have very many pictures of myself in middle school. I struggled a lot with my own self-esteem, a lot of my own shame, and I didn't have many pictures. I don't have very many pictures that I can find. When I think of those 3 years, 6th through 8th grade, I think of a lot of hurt. I think of a lot of not being able to even look at myself in the mirror. I don't really remember myself at that time. And so that is the next portion of my story. It's me trying to look for myself, but also feeling a lot of shame. I went back to Puerto Rico after a couple of years in the 6th grade, and remembered that I couldn't keep up speaking my language to my family, and how distraught I was that I couldn't even speak the language where I'm from. This is where I'm from. This is who I am. Why don't the words flow out of my mouth as well as they do in my head? And I remember being very shy about it, and being very much like, what if I make a mistake? When I decided to have my quince in Puerto Rico, I decided that it was about time that I took ownership of the education system that had failed me. Now it's my time to take advantage of what they are giving me. And when I was in the 8th grade, I was able to have the opportunity to take Spanish 1. And I learned this poem. This poem was the first poem that I had ever memorized in Spanish. And I competed in the 8th grade against seniors who were in Spanish 4, and I won first place. And that was the beginning of my confidence. It was like, yeah, I can say cultivo una rosa blanca. And I memorized it. And not only did I memorize it, my Spanish teacher forced me to write in Spanish that I'd never done before. And I placed 3rd against native Spanish speakers. And so I began to start beginning that ownership of myself in high school with Spanish 1, with Spanish 2, and continuing to learn that Spanish and being proud of it. The knowing who I am and finding my place. I'm very grateful that I was able to go to Texas State University. There's a large Latino population here. I still live in San Marcos. I still live near Texas State. My brother goes to school here. And I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to kind of be in this place where there are other people who look like me. There's a lot of brown kids here. There's a lot of kids who speak Spanish. There is that Mexican culture that like I absolutely love growing up here in Texas. I really got to learn different Latino cultures, and being able to completely be myself and being allowed and given the space to grow and to learn, and being given kind of the cushion from my professors and my other peers to have conversation and learn and grow with myself. And when I'm thinking about what is during college, the word that keeps coming up is becoming. When Hurricane Maria hit, it's been about 3 years ago, I got my first tattoo. It's of the coqui frog. The frog is native to Puerto Rico. The Tainos drew it all over caves. Unfortunately, we know that the Spanish wiped out this population. We don't know their language, but their cave drawings are all over. And so I thought, what better way to connect myself is to mark myself with ancestry. And it is my pride. I'm so grateful to be able to tell people what it is, and being able to represent my culture, not only on my body, in my person, in my graduation pictures, but being able to say, like, I'm the first person in my family to go to an American university and go abroad, not because I needed to go abroad to fight war, but because I've chosen to go abroad to learn culture. And if you can go to the next slide. As an educator, I want to give my students the opportunity that I was never given, the opportunity that was taken away from me, the opportunity that I was forced to assimilate into a culture that is not mine, stripped of a language that is mine, that is completely me, and be given the space to explore. Separate is Never Equal, Tito Puentes. These are all books that I read to my students, that I read to my students now. They're books that when I read for the first time was like, wow, I for the first time see myself in a book at 24, almost 25 years old. I see myself. These are the people that I listen to. These are people that I love. This is my story of leaving, my story of always feeling more at home in a place that I'm barely at. And so what's next for me? Fulfilling my dreams of a Latina, of living abroad, advocating for my people. How do I make my country better than what it is? How do I advocate for Puerto Rico? How do I find healing in my writing? And I want to give this creative art and give space to traditional dance. I studied dance in college, and so I want to be able to give a space to Puerto Ricans to be able to really express this culture that even the young people now are starting to lose. I drew and I wrote this art piece. I'm going to share this poem that I wrote that kind of came all encompassing of what I've spoken about. And it says, brown skin, freckles and sunspots, societal imperfections, but a natural phenomenon like a river cutting out of a side of a mountain. My body is a wonderland. The words flowing from a sacred place transcends further than galaxies, tongue wounded by shame, misinformation, assimilation, mother tongue replaced by colonization, stolen by the American dream, rage simmering in my soul. I'll wait until it comes back. And then the last little bit of my poem says, Mujer poderosa, allow yourself to take space. Let language flow out of you like winds carrying you life to a new valley. You have unlearned and relearned. Your ancestors greet you with praise. And it's just pictures of me throughout my education system. And so this poem just kind of encompasses everything that I felt. Learning and unlearning is what I'm kind of dealing with right now. Learning to love myself, not only as a mujer, as a Latina, but all of the imperfections and healing as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I apologize that just happened. And I thank you for your story and your words. And I'm going to introduce the next teacher, Maestra Valdez, who will share her experiences with us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carmela Valdez, and I say that in Spanish because I want to honor my ancestors. I was named Carmela. I wasn't named an English name on purpose. So I introduce myself in Spanish, and other people will have to catch up. So because I teach virtually, I live in clip art. So that's what I thought I'd do for our presentation today. I was born in the 70s. I know I look amazing, but I was born in the 70s, and my first school experience was with a Catholic church. This is really important to me because when my father was school age, he did not speak English, and he wasn't allowed to go to public education. He went to a parochial school. So a Catholic school was really important to my family, and I think he wanted to give that to me. My mother did not speak English until the 5th grade, and she told of experiences of her not really knowing what was going on until then. So we know, scientifically how long it takes to learn a language, and that was pretty on par with what she did. But but my parents moved through that and successfully went on to do postgraduate work. And so education in my family was always really important and a way to find success. So I started my journey in a bilingual classroom. And then I couldn't believe that I found a picture of this book online from so long ago. My dad had a set of books that were called Stories That Must Not Die. And they were like folk tales from South Texas, because we are all from South Texas. My family is from Kingsville. I was born in San Antonio, and then I lived in Robstown, Texas. And so when we lived in Robstown, I would read these stories, and it was like, one of the ones that I remember is La Llorona. And so I thought, for me, as a tiny person in South Texas, this was really the only representation of anyone brown or Latina in a book that I'd ever seen. And so I sort of clung to these stories and read them over and over again. I mean, La Llorona, it doesn't end well for her, but it was still something that I really connected to. So when I was in first grade, they moved me to an all English class, and thought, you know, I would do great, and I did okay. But I lost my Spanish, and I lost part of the connection to my family. I noticed my parents would start to speak Spanish so that my sister and I wouldn't understand what they were saying, but we really did. But I really struggled I didn't speak to my parents in Spanish. And so I always felt this disconnect, like that I was missing something, right? And so that continued in my life it's a recurring theme. So we moved, but the day before sixth grade, then we moved to Houston, and to an all middle class, upper middle class white community. Out of a school of 700 in my high school, I was one of 6 Latinos. And so it was a very different, I came from South Texas to this other, it was a huge cultural change. But I'm one of those people that passes, right? So I have light skin, and, I'm so articulate. But I still felt different. I felt like I didn't belong. Like I was missing a big part of myself. Okay, so next. Thank you so much. So I had this block. It was all white faces. No one looked like me. I was an outsider once again. But I persisted, and I continued. My parents kept saying, education is a way to find success. And it is, for them, I think it was important on many different levels. And I think some of it stems from that beginning school experience. It was like, you aren't good enough for us, but wait, we are. So I went to UT, and like Yakira was saying, it was diversity. There were brown people, there were Black people, there were all different shades and languages, and it was really amazing. And I was really profoundly excited by that prospect. So I studied theater, and so I spent a lot of time in a very niche-y sort of like area. Lots of white people again, but it was something that I really loved. And I loved, that was art for me. And it was an expression of what my heart is about, some part of it anyway. And then later towards the end of my career at UT, and it was unfortunately kind of a long one, I took a Mexican American Studies class, and it was like somebody opened the door and like invited me into this completely different world. And I have here, we had been told all of these years as a person in Texas, you remember the Alamo, like this is happening. But then I learned the other side, and that had never even been like told to me. And it was like, what? Okay, that's not all right. So I am not a fan. I would root for the other side. In case you're wondering, John Wayne, that whole story, not the real thing. So anyway, it was a whole, it was a cultural door that was open to me, and I felt proud, and I felt Like I wasn't like, I'd been lied to all of this time, and on the sidelines, you know, my story, my people, my culture had been put to the side on purpose, and it was really eye-opening to me. And anyway, so that was a huge game changer for me. All right, I think I'm ready for the next slide. So I graduated with a degree in theater. Oh, look, now I found a typo. I graduated with a degree in theater, and I worked in professional theater for over 10 years, but I didn't feel fulfilled. And my parents were educators, all of their careers. And so I thought, okay, I'll go into the family business. And I had a really good friend that was getting his teacher certification in elementary school. And because I had a theater background, everybody thought, go teach theater. I was like, it's not really it wasn't connecting with me for some reason. And I know that there was a bigger plan for me. So I went to Texas State and I got my master's degree in early childhood and with a focus in bilingual education, because I really wanted to study language acquisition and people learning two languages and the history. And I really wanted to immerse myself in that because I wanted to be the teacher that my parents deserved to have and the teacher that I always wanted, right? I wanted to be as a heritage language learner. I wanted to have those doors open to me earlier than, you know, like my 4th year in college. And I wanted to be able to service and fight for and advocate for the students that my parents were. So I relearned Spanish. It was humbling and it was hard. And it really does take 5 to 7 years, in case you're wondering. And I am now a bilingual teacher. This year I'm teaching kindergarten, so very tiny people, and they are amazing. And like I said, I wanted to be the teacher that they never had. And so that sort of moves me forward in my lucha, right? In my fight for equity. So what happens next? Let's see. So I really believe that language is a civil right. And I believe that if in a school a child is denied their language or education in their language, that it is oppressive. And so I really advocate in my school district. I've helped to write policy to make sure that students get treated fairly and that their civil rights are honored. I continued to advocate for a bilingual writers workshop when I learned about workshop and heard some researchers say that it wasn't for bilingual students. It sort of got me excited to do the opposite. So it to me is another way to move something that has been given to white middle class students and giving it to the students that I work with and work for them to know that their voice matters and it is important. And I keep, you know, harking back to the kid that I was and fighting for that, right? So then a culturally sustaining pedagogy. Like Akira reads those books that are so amazing that she focused on, I too look for my students and my culture and their culture reflected in the books that we read, because I really think it is important that if they see themselves in books, then they understand that this school system is not just for one type of student, that it is for all of us, and that we all should be represented and should be seen and should see ourselves. So those are the things. How I continue to advocate for those things, we'll see. What the future holds, we don't know, but those things are strong in my heart to continue to work for.
Thank you so much, Maestra Valdez. I appreciate you sharing your experiences and what brings you to this work and what continues to nurture you and sustain you as you move forward alongside your students. And so now that we've heard from these two brilliant maestras, their experiences as students, their experiences as classroom teachers, those of their family, that really influences how they view the world, how they walk in the world. That of language loss, revitalization, sustaining language. I want to bring this question to all of us. What dialogue do we as educators and teacher educators and researchers need to have about languages? And I'm going to go ahead and open up the conversation to whoever would like to.
I just want to start by saying that to me, language has always been either a separator or something that brings people together. I think that the purposeful separation from people and their language is a form of oppression, and it has been. And I think that that's what they tried to do to my parents. They tried to make sure that they were not successful. And in spite of those things, my parents, being the heroes that they are, have gotten past those forms of oppression, but they still live deep in their heart, and it's generational because it has been passed on to me. And so I think that language is a powerful thing.
I think one of the things that we all need to, I think, as teachers, as educators, and even with our students is, I mean, I didn't know that this was like my experience as a student was a shared experience. You know, I didn't realize it until talking with Tracy. It's been about a year now that this was my experience. I just thought like, it's just another school experience, but I didn't realize just how powerful it was and just how oppressive, like Carmela says the word is, oppressive it was as a person, how deeply it hurt me that I'm still, trying to figure out, or till recently was really trying to heal a lot of that pain, a lot of that shame, a lot of those deep conversations I've had to have with my parents. And one of the things that we don't have very often is a space to talk about as teachers, how have we been hurt by our own education system because of the separation of language, because being seen that you speak another language besides English in this country is a deficit, rather than as a benefit, as this person can speak more than one language, and let's see how we can get their culture into their education. How can we assist them so that way they don't feel like they are othered in this country, which many of the times, I mean, I still do feel very othered in this country, by my experience as a student, by my experience as a Latina, by the way that I look. And it's just even beginning to have that dialogue that a lot of the times we don't have, because systemically we must push on in education. We must get to the next thing. We must get to the next test. We must push them to the next grade level. And we tend to forget the experience that our students have as a system, not as teachers, but as a system. We tend to forget those things.
I mean, I would agree. I mean, here in the state of Texas, our students are still categorized as limited English proficient, right? So a student that comes in knowing one language or more than one language, because the language that at home is not English, they are limited somehow. When you add together the two languages that are in that student's brain, English, Spanish, what other language, what other language, other than Spanish, or that adds up to more than what the people who make the laws, right, have. So that student is already far and above, beyond other people, but they're not the ones that are in charge, and so they're limited. So that carries them all the way through 5th grade, and then sometimes beyond. And so they're labeled as limited. And so how would you feel if you were labeled in pre-K as limited, right? I mean,
Thank you all for sharing your thoughts. A lot of the things you're all saying like resonate with me from my own experience, right? Learning English as a second language, to my own experience as a teacher working with, preschoolers, and these assessments, saying that they didn't have language, right? That there was a deficit. From now, thinking about as a graduate student, and as a future teacher educator, thinking about like the multiple layers and complexities from these stories, right? Because I think that many times, when you ask this question, if you are just thinking about Latino, right? Even that word in itself is so complex and there's so many experiences. But if you're seeing it from like, it represents this one monolithic experience, you kind of miss out. And you have all these policies like dual language, bilingual, transitional. And the thing is that, well, one, it's creating this narrative that what works for one group of people or one student isn't going to work for everyone. And the reality is that it's context based. Like, where are you situated? Where are you located? What are the other communities in your community? What are the migration patterns? And what are the histories of people that have always been there, which we know is not just white people, right? Like, it's native and indigenous people. So I think that there's so many like complex experiences that show us how different people experience language oppression, as you're all calling it, right? Some people are racialized, so when you look at them, you think right away they must speak Spanish, but other bodies are racialized as, oh, you don't speak Spanish, right? Like, that doesn't make sense because it's been put into your mind through textbooks, mainstream media, right? Or these stereotypes that must be it. And the other point, right, that it's also like put into, common knowledge, I guess, for lack of better words, is that, but when we think about bilingual or dual language, we think about these very separate two languages. And the thing is that, like, I speak Spanish in so many ways. I speak Spanish with my ama. I speak Spanish with my brother, that is like Spanglish. I speak Spanish with la señora. I speak Spanish with the papás de mis estudiantes, right? So it's like there are different ways and different words that you use and different regionalismos, based on from the countries where you come from, or also the different areas you grew up in, right, in the United States. So just to add that to the conversation, that it's more complex and there aren't easy answers, so we need more spaces to dialogue.
I think that's really, oh my goodness. I think it's really powerful the way that I'm just gonna let her go for it. I think it's really powerful the way that you've talked about how, like, a lot of the times in education, we separate language and dual language. Because it, even like as a first year teacher, really young 22-year-old, I don't know how they let a 22-year-old be a teacher and with 20 other 6-year-olds. I don't know why they let me do that, but they did. And so I did it. But in my school, it felt, because I was the only dual language teacher, there were 4 other English monolingual classes. My students were very much othered. Oh, those are the Spanish kids. And so it was like, wait, whoa. And I think that, but a lot of times we don't have that conversation about, like, how is our system and education othering our own kids in our own schools? And how it feels like not only are my kids dual language kids, that they were labeled as at risk because they're limited proficient, or because they live in the country with their larger families, or because they're stereotyped because they're socioeconomically low. Here are all of these lists of things where we can other your students in our own classrooms. And then how do we as educators and administrators not use that language in front of our students? How are we like talking to our students? Because, having, as a 22-year-old teacher, coming into the experiences, realizing, like, I'm in a classroom where Coco, the movie Coco had just come out. I felt really empowered by, like, here is this culture that I'm close to. Here's this Mexican culture. Here's this language, the Rivera family. I'm a Rivera. Here's this family that I see my abuela. I see these people. and how do I involve it in my classroom, but also how do I push that out? Like these are not just Spanish kids. These are not kids who are in a late transition bilingual classroom. You must only speak to them in Spanish. It's like, no, how do I invite language into my classroom? How do I also disassociate those languages that educators and administrators, very formal language that we use? Because in my classroom, it's like, no, these are not Spanish kids. These are intelligent estudiantes. These are students who've gone through stuff. These are students who translate to their parents at 6-year-olds. These are students who share the same experience as I share. How do we as educators then dismantle those check boxes, dismantle that vocabulary that our students, like I could see when my administrators would come in and speak to me, it's like, wait, whoa, we don't speak to my students this way. My students are here from the beginning of the year. None of them spoke English. At the end of the year, if they had an only English speaking spub, they can handle all day long. They can speak to her. That's the work that educators are putting into their students, because we know that with migration patterns, we know that our students are not just Spanish speaking students. These students are translators. These students are more than just what we see, thinking of their home life. And that's a lot of times what the system doesn't see. Our students, just like me, I was translator for my parents, and I still am. My mom still asks me words, and she works and wants to work on her vocabulary. But this is what our students have. Our students are really pressured, and we are pressuring them more by saying that they are limited because they speak a different language of that, like English isn't even the official language of this country. We're just forcing this experience on our students that we're like, also need to have open conversation about how are we talking to our students? How are we even limiting them with our own words? Even being Latinos, how are we not stopping this? How are we not having conversations with administrators, with the superintendents, with school boards, with other white parents in our communities?
Well, and I totally agree. And I think that we also have to think about the other layer of language in class when you have students pressure to speak proper Spanish, as opposed to the Spanish that their family speak, right? So they're already wrong, right? So they're speaking Spanish and they're wrong. It's another form of colonization of the classroom, right? And then also then there's the layer of the programs in dual language that survive are the ones that have the white middle class kids that come in so that they can learn Spanish. So now teachers are forced to move and focus their program so that student can become proficient, but then the students that the program was created for, whose civil rights have earned that program, are getting put by the wayside.
I think it's really powerful. I think I really connect when you say like this, the difference between the Spanish, because like Spanish in Puerto Rico is very different than the Spanish that's spoken here by Mexican immigrants, by like the Tex-Mex Spanglish. My Spanish is already labeled as wrong because I don't pronounce my R's right. And instead it'd be like mera, like I'm very lax with the way that I speak Spanish. And then because I've had to assimilate to the Spanish, even myself, I have to catch myself of like, that's not my accent. That's an accent I put on because I've been told, even as an educator, of like, your Spanish sounds funny. It's like, that's just where I'm from. This is just culturally how we speak. And how are we speaking even to each other? Like it's all one language. Who cares the way that it's spoken? Who cares the accent that it's spoken? What is proper Spanish? And proper Spanish is like this colonized Spanish. And how are we even teaching this colonized Spanish to our kids?
I had a brother-in-law. He is no longer my brother-in-law, who was from Bolivia, right? So he learned proper Spanish and also lived in a community where they spoke Quechua, which is the indigenous language there. So I was in the process of relearning my Spanish, and I was speaking to him one day, and as somebody who has always wanted to connect with a native speaker, I was speaking to him one day and he said, "You sound like a Mexican." And I thought, yes, it was not a compliment from him, but I was really proud that I had gained the accent of the people that I come from. So he tried to, not be super nice, but it was a very, very proud moment for me. But other people feel, you know, that way. Like there's that, the accent is like, you know, God, you sound like whoever, you know, I won't say, but it's a class thing too, right? Within the Latino community. Anyway, he's no longer my brother-in-law.
So in this conversation that we're having right now about our stories, our histories, that of our parents, of our elders and our ancestors, what I'm coming away with is that we need to continue to have these conversations. We need to continue to have dialogue with each other, with our peers, with our administrators, with teacher educators, with policymakers, and really question the policies that are in place, the mandates that are in place, because there's a history to everything. This is not some isolated moment. You have us 4 women who all come from different parts of the country, who are all brought together for this work, and who all share these overlapping and intersecting experiences. And so what I'm taking away from this is that we need to continue to dialogue. We need to continue to, with our practice, with our research, with our bodies, disrupt all of these silencing practices, these colonizing practices, to heal ourselves and to break these systems. And so I hope that everyone listening right now wants to engage in this dialogue, feels this moment right now as a movement to continue to think about what you've just heard from our maestras, what you've heard from this ending plática, and how we can move forward in the service of our ancestors and in the service of the families and the children and the communities that we serve. And so I want to thank everyone for being here this evening. I want to thank our maestras. I want to thank Judith. Thank you so much for being in conversation. And I feel so blessed to be here. There's so much going on in our lives, so many Zooms, so many things to record. And in this moment, I feel so grateful for all of you and to be able to have sat in our stories like this and to start to dialogue and dream about the possibilities of our work and that of what our students are going to be able to do, as well as we dialogue with them and help them know that they're not alone in their stories as well. Thank you everyone for being here today, and we hope to see you soon in the live part of our presentation. Please keep in touch. Adios.